In the final years of the original MG car company, the firm, strapped for cash, had settled into an uncomfortable position of producing the popular but aging MGF and rebadged products from the Rover range that included a few cosmetic changes and engine modifications, a clear sign of the brand's significant decline from one of Britain's most sought-after sports car makers. However, MG were determined to have one last stab at making waves on the sports car market, and thus the MG X-Power SV was born, a restyled variant of a pre-existing Italian sports car that, while stunning to look at, ultimately failed to help reverse the fortunes of the ailing marque. The story of the MG SV begins in 1993 in Modena, Italy, home to 5 of the nation's most famous sports car builders, Ferrari, Lamborghini, Pagani, Maserati and Tomaso, with the latter, during that year, beginning development of a prototype known as the Bigua, a low-slung sports car styled by Marcello Gandini that was built to rival the likes of the TVR Griffith. Upon its unveiling at the 1996 Geneva Motor Show, the Bigua was to become the new face of the company by revising the image of traditional supercars, moving away from the brash styling and large dimensions of the 1970s and 80s with cars like the Ferrari F40, the Lamborghini Countach and Di Tomaso's own Pantera, and instead adopting a more compact size that didn't sacrifice power or performance. Continuing a Di Tomaso tradition, the car was fitted with a 4.6-litre V8 engine from the Ford Mustang, and was designed to meet all the safety requirements of American legislation, but this time would be built as a mass-production sports car model rather than a bespoke low-production machine. Sadly, Di Tomaso, as Italy's smallest sports car maker, and one which had been in and out of financial trouble several times over the previous decade, were unable to carry the cost of creating a mass-production variant of the Bigua, and thus turned to Norwegian-American business executive Kjell Qvale. Qvale was an entrepreneur who had seen involvement in the auto industry since 1947, starting as an importer for MGs being sold on the American market in California, before expanding to include Bentleys, Jaguars, Lotuses and Rolls-Royces. After bringing the Volkswagen Beetle to the United States in 1953, as well as forming the British Motor Car Distributors Company or BMCD to help import British Leyland products to the American market, Qvale first began dealings with Di Tomaso in 1970, acting as importer for the company's Mangusta, Pantera and Deauville. Qvale's main aspiration, though, was to build a mass-production sports car of his own, and seeing Di Tomaso's plight as to the Bigua, the Qvale Auto Group provided the much-needed funds, and was to be launched as the Di Tomaso Mangusta in around 1998. However, after Qvale had invested $30 million into the scheme, the deal between himself and Di Tomaso ended abruptly and on a sour note, following distribution and licensing issues, meaning that the model was reverted in 1997 to the Qvale Modena Company, a subsidiary of the wider Qvale Auto Group, and thus would be marketed as the Qvale Mangusta. The finished product, launched in November 1999, bore little to no difference from the original Bigua prototype, while through a mixture of Qvale's lack of brand recognition, the car's odd styling, and an oversaturated market for sports cars, the Mangusta was a phenomenal commercial failure, selling only 284 units before production ended in 2002. Meanwhile, in Birmingham, the ailing Rover Group, which had been under the ownership of BMW since 1994, was facing a protracted demise as the firm was stripped of its most profitable assets following its sale by the German car giant to the Phoenix Venture Holdings for a derisory sum of just £1. With the highly successful Land Rover Range Rover brand having been sold to Ford, and the legendary Mini marque now being relaunched under BMW ownership with the Mini Cooper of 2000, the newly formed MG Rover Group was saddled with a series of aging and largely unpopular machines, many of which had underpinnings dating back to the firm's former deal with Honda to provide parts and running gear from the Civic during the 1980s. Keeping an eye out for anything that could possibly salvage the company's poor financial state, the MG Rover management quickly took note of the Mangusta and Qvale's desperate attempts to get it sold, and thereby placed him an offer to acquire the assets of the Qvale Modena Company on June 19, 2001 at a cost of £7 million. The intention of the deal was to provide the MG marque with a high-performance upmarket sports car that would be placed above the MGF in the model range, a desire that had first been considered as early as 1985 with the MG EXE supercar, a 186-mile-an-hour prototype that never made it to full production. Purchasing the Mangusta was seen as a stroke of genius, as it meant that MG Rover, with its own financial woes, didn't need to develop their own model over the course of several years and at significant expense, the car also having the added benefit of being designed to suit the lucrative American market, and was comprehensively restyled by Peter Stevens' styling studio, who had previously designed the likes of the McLaren F1. On September 11, 2001, in a largely subdued Frankfurt Motor Show, done out of respect for the victims of the attacks on America earlier that day, the prototype X80 was unveiled, and while the car was a stylish-looking machine, many of its Mangusta roots were still present, and Stevens considered there to be more work required in order to make the finished product perfect, although the motoring press were intrigued by the bold new direction being taken by MG. Back in the UK, the MG Rover management had huge plans for the X80, with proposals to have the car built with an all-aluminium body at a rate of 10,000 cars per year from the Longbridge plant, essentially making it a rival to the likes of the Jaguar XJR. Unfortunately, reality began to set in as the potential tooling costs, together with an interested but largely ambivalent reception for the X80 prototype, meant that confidence in the project was rumbled, but at no point did MG Rover consider abandoning the scheme. In the wake of the 2001 Frankfurt Motor Show, Stevens took the X80 back to the drawing board, while a new arm of the MG company, the MG Sports and Racing Division, was established, with Stevens heading a subsidiary called MG X80 Limited, his position as managing director reflecting his own experience with the McLaren F1 and the 1987 Lotus Esprit. To match the changing trends in sports car design, the somewhat conservatively styled X80 was quickly reworked into an aggressive-looking machine, and the original concept of the X80 being a boulevard cruiser like the Maserati 3200 GT was quickly transformed into a dedicated racer like the BMW M3. This change in direction was reflected by the fact that the somewhat unvarying moniker of X80 was dropped in favor of a newer, stronger title that was somewhat in keeping with the MG naming convention, but updated to suit the extreme trends of the early 2000s, the car now being dubbed the MG X-Power SV. With the assistance of Italian engineer Giordano Casarini, who had been with the project since its conception as the Bigua back in 1993, the car's dynamics were altered significantly, with the general underpinning seeing a radical overhaul, including airflow management, the use of carbon fiber panels in place of previous plastic panels to shed 100 kilograms of weight, and the fitting of a quad-cam Ford modular V8 from the Mustang, tuned by Roush Performance of Livonia, Michigan. In all, it took 300 days to convert the original clay model into a production car, through the assistance of the Swedish company Caron, with the production process itself being very complicated, partly due to the use of carbon fiber to make the body panels, with the basic body parts being assembled in Britain by SP Systems and then shipped to Belco Avia near Turin for assembly into body panels. These were then assembled into a complete body shell and fitted onto the box frame chassis and running gear before being shipped back to the MG Rover factory at Longbridge for final assembly, a testament to Stevens' haste to get the car completed on time and under budget, being the extensive use of part sharing with other contemporary models from both MG Rover and Fiat. The headlights, for example, were taken from the second-generation Fiat Punto, and the rear lights from the Fiat Coupe, while the exterior door handles came from an MG TF, and the mirrors, window switches and interior door handles came from the Rover 75, the production process requiring each vehicle to visit at least 6 different companies before it left for the showroom. While this was all going on, the motoring press and onlookers had no idea that the super sports car project was still being pursued by MG Rover, believing that the X80 was merely a one-off concept displayed at the 2001 show, but was never destined for mass assembly, though some news occasionally made it to the public through magazine articles and press statements by Stevens. Eventually, the MG X-Power SV was officially launched on October 22, 2002, and came in 2 variants, the initial base model being launched with a 4.6-litre Ford modular V8 engine rated at 320 horsepower, which, in combination with the SV's advanced carbon fiber body, helped it to achieve a top speed of 165 miles an hour and a 0-60 time of 5.3 seconds, while also meeting MG Rover's target of costing less than £100,000, as it entered sales at only £65,000. The second variant, the MG X-Power SVR, released the following year at the Geneva Motor Show, and featured a Roush-tuned Cammer 5-litre 32-valve modular V8 engine, producing between 385 and 410 horsepower, with the top speed being estimated to be around 175 miles an hour, and its 0-60 time being close to 4.9 seconds, this model entering sales at £83,000 and was offered with a choice of either manual or automatic transmissions unlike the base model. The launch garnered much enthusiasm, with Stephen stating that the MG X-Power SV was just the beginning of a whole slew of high-performance sports cars for the MG marque, including models that would produce up to and over 900 horsepower, though this highly optimistic output was later curtailed to something more realistic. However, this isn't to say that MG was not able to potentially produce a car with such a vast amount of horsepower, as this was attested to by the record-winning run of a 765 horsepower MG ZTT on the Bonneville Salt Flats in November 2003, which reached a top speed of 225 miles an hour. Nevertheless, once the X-Power SVR had been launched in 2004, the performance figures continued to look promising for MG's new Leviathan, its 4.9-second 0-60 time and 175 mile an hour top speed, making it faster than the electronically limited BMW M3, which could only attain 155 miles an hour, while matching the contemporary Jaguar XKR with a 0-60 time of 5 seconds and a top speed of 174 miles an hour. In terms of critical reception, though, the car received a lukewarm response from journalists, its grippy precise handling and performance being praised, while complaints emerged regarding its build quality and £82,950 retail price, which put it in the same league as the TVR Tuscan Speed 6, and thus made it unobtainable for the regular MG clientele that sought cheap but cheery roadsters like the MGF. However, the car's biggest criticism was yet to come, as amid the MG X-Power SV's struggle to make waves in the high-performance sports car market, the MG Rover company would collapse into bankruptcy on April 10, 2005, following a slew of mismanagement, asset stripping, poorly selling models that had little appeal on the international market, and investments being made into dubious products or sectors of the market. With regard to the latter aspect of MG Rover's failure, the X-Power SV was highlighted as the most egregious example of the management's pouring of money into niche products that were never likely to make a return on investment, with the purchase of the original Mangusta and its conversion into an MG sports car costing £7 million overall, while not one of the 82 cars built made their money back. Motoring commentators argued that the huge sums injected into the MG X-Power SV project should have been better spent on revitalizing the regular mass-production car range in order to replace aging cars like the Rover 25 and 45, rather than instead creating a potential BMW and Jaguar hunter that was being thrust into a market it had no chance of survival in, based merely on the MG badge alone. In the end, the MG X-Power SV is often considered to be a curiosity of the British motor industry during its dying years, with this sudden and last-minute attempt to appeal the MG marque to an entirely new customer base, when the wider firm was bleeding money, being seen simply as a fatuous attempt to chase trends in the hope that it might strike a chord with the ultra-rich market for high-performance cars. Nevertheless, the resultant machine was in fact a very powerful and exceptionally well-handling sports car that did, in practical terms, give the likes of Jaguar, BMW and TVR a valiant challenger on the track, as reflected in its performance numbers and lap times, the X-Power SV being fondly remembered today by enthusiasts for it being the last attempt by MG to truly take one final chance to prove itself on the sports car market.